Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the INTP stream. Continuing the series on government and government engineering, which I think is the best way of encapsulating, whatever the word is, the kinds of topics that I'm trying to cover now. Government engineering, right? So how could we make it better? How could we optimize the system to make it work better, make it function better according to its purposes, to serve its purposes more effectively and to serve society more effectively, right? How do we do this? It's a very important question. And, you know, these institutions we have and these rules and these kinds of, they're worth improving if they're worth existing. So how do we do it? What are some ideas about how we make it function better, more effectively, more efficiently, more democratically, more intelligently? How do we do that? Well, I'm a believer that there may be some benefit to negative pressure, right? There are incentives, in economics, you learn about incentivization and how in microeconomics, you could encourage individuals to make good decisions and try to deflect their bad decision making, to do good and not bad, and to act intelligently rather than unintelligently. How do we incentivize our representatives and our elected representatives to presidents, congressmen, Supreme Court justices? How do we get them to act effectively? I think the application of some pressure in the form of negative incentives may be a good idea. So one idea, is to, well, this is kind of an interesting idea, I think. After elections occur, right? Recent after elections occur, one thing that we could do is establish elections, decide, what particular party, right, for instance, gets into power and what party controls what. Since we have to concede that we've got this binary party system, let's just work within that party system. And since in most regions, since all regions seem to adhere to this basic binary party system, Republican and Democrat, left and right, if we're going to concede that this party system continues to exist, which is pretty much inevitable, how do we get these parties to, how do we threaten them in the right ways to get them to act effectively? And I think that one thing we could do is establish provisional governments recently after elections. What I mean by that is, after the congressional election and after the Senate elections, we have all of our new congressmen and senators. And I think this would more apply to, it could apply to presidents as well. And it certainly, of course, Supreme Court justices aren't elected. So we're talking about the executive and the legislative branches here. So, essentially, how do we get these people, these representatives, these elected representatives to act effectively, right? Well, one, we need to measure their performance, right? We need to establish objective metrics by which we can measure the performance of our representatives and our elected leaders. And in terms of the logistical execution and the design of these objective metrics, I'd be willing to consider that further, but let's just start with this idea first, right? I think it's a good enough idea so that we could probably work out the logistics if we follow through on it. But let's just present this snippet of an idea first. After elections, parties come into power, new congressmen, new senators, new presidents, and we have this binary party system, which we have to concede will continue to exist. So how do we get this? How do we get these party actors, which is what they are essentially? They're not really representatives; they're representatives of the party, not necessarily of the people. And I talked about in a previous video, you really can't have democracy and parties. Parties are a direct manifestation of the tyranny of the majority problem. And so, in some way, our party system is very anti-democratic because then, right, Republicans win, Democrats not represented. Democrats win, Republicans not represented, right? Well, so why? Yeah, I get that we have this system of majority rule, but how is majority rule compatible with democracy? It's not, right? It's a tyranny of the majority, right? The majority is represented. Its interests are represented. Its policy preferences are represented. Its ethical and political preferences are represented, but not the minority. So what do we do about the minority? So in any case, that's about as far as I want to take that line of thinking. But what about, so the way that this provisional government system would work is that after elections, we basically make the statement that power is not absolute after an election. It's provisional. And we always have this, in the media, we have this, sort of period of the 100 days, right? It can be 100 days. It can be 200 days. Preferably, I think the 100 days idea has already been cemented into public thought. So I'll just go with the 100 days. In those 100 days, recently after an election, party representatives come into power in distinct districts and in different Senate regions in different states, and president of whichever particular binary party, comes into power. Well, let's just say that, we're in the first 100 days going to objectively measure, right, your performance. We're going to establish objective metrics by which we can do that. And if you don't meet those metrics adequately, then what will happen automatically is for each individual district, and for Senate state, for each individual congressional district, and even for the presidency, if in this first 100 days, if you don't meet certain thresholds on the scoring systems for these objective metrics of performance, then automatically your power is rescinded, and you then are booted out of office, and whoever was the runner-up in the relevant election is the one that goes into power. So if you don't in the first 100 days, if you don't meet certain, if the body as a whole, the representative body as a whole, meaning Congress, the Senate, and the presidency, if it's not meeting thresholds on certain objective metric systems, scoring systems that track objectively the performance of these elected leaders and representatives, if you don't meet those thresholds, your power is rescinded. Thus, we have the provisional power that we've already talked about. Your power is provisional. If you don't meet the proper scores, then your power is rescinded, and your congressional district, then you're booted out of office, and the runner-up then automatically goes into office, right? Same for the presidency, same for the Senate, right? Same principles apply. And I think what this would do is in the first 100 days, it would put immense pressure. I mean, Congress always has things to act on. And these scoring systems, these systems that try to track performance, can be as objective and charitable and analytical as possible. And if, they're well designed and the logistical execution is there, we can do it, I think. I want to think through that a bit more as to how we would score congressmen and senators and presidents, what factors would be taken into account, what variables, what situational variables, based on the state of the world and whatnot. It's simply a matter of what we would consider. I think logistically, ultimately, it could work if we're given sufficient time to think about that. But if we, after these elections, recent elections, congressional elections, Senate elections, presidential elections, put the pressure on our elected representatives, to act effectively, to meet certain scoring thresholds containing objective and meet certain scoring levels based on considerations of objective criteria, we can put pressure on them in the first 100 days really to act effectively as representatives. And because they're under the threat, if you don't meet these thresholds, you're booted out of office and the runner-up is going to be able to come into power. Now, a smart person is going to ask me, well, there's an infinite recursion problem there. And that's kind of an abstract term. Let me define what I mean. What happens then, right? So let's say in Congress, measuring the performance of the there's always the question of who sets these scoring thresholds, who develops or designs the scoring criteria. We can get into that later. Let's just consider the macro effects of this kind of a system. Sure, I get it. All power is provisional, and you're subject to review at the next election. I think it's true that, even in the current system, congressmen, senators, presidents have their finite terms, and they're always under threat of being booted out of office by the next election. I don't think that's necessarily adequate for, to ensure they're performing as democratically efficiently and as effectively as possible. However you want to define those terms. We could get into that later. But I think that it's good enough that, this would put pressure on our elected representatives to act effectively according to these objective metrics of performance. And if they don't, well, they're booted out of office immediately. Their power was provisional. Power is reinstated in the runner-up, right? For each congressional district, for each Senate state, and even for the presidency. Now, people are going to ask, well, then what happens when one party's booted out of office because it didn't perform well, the other one goes in? Are they going to be subjected to the same scoring thresholds and the same 100 days performance measures? No, they don't have to be. They don't have to be. We're not creating any kind of, once is enough, right? Once they go into power, yeah, it's just going to be whatever their, next time they'll be subject to election and to review by the people, will be whenever the next voting cycle is. And yeah, I don't think there needs to be any more than one threat recently after an election where power is temporarily provisional. If our representatives, elected representatives, our presidents, I say presidents plural because in a previous video I suggested that we have a tricameral executive. But going with the system as it currently is, having to concede we're going to have this binary party system, which we'll probably never get rid of because it's so deeply entrenched in how we politically identify. I think it's just it would place pressure on representatives, and these metrics they wouldn't be rigid. They'd be flexible, right? Any kind of rigid, system of scoring system, it's not really going to convey the reality. We have to make sure these metrics are designed delicately and enforced judiciously, and I think ultimately these scoring systems could even be some sort of weird thing where we co-opt, cell phone and internet technology, and people are able to, individuals, citizens, business owners, CEOs, anyone, right? Anyone would then be able to tap into this scoring system and say, hey, okay, it's a simple survey system. Are you satisfied with your representative's performance? Right? Of course, I don't even want to say that individuals should decide this because there's a ton of bias there. It really doesn't ensure any better performance. And since, we can't leave it to the people ultimately to do this, enforce these, to craft and to enforce these scoring systems, because what ends up happening is if you're just surveying everyone, then Republicans are going to just, even if they're satisfied with their Democrat representative, are going to leave bad reviews to ensure they're booted out of office and they regain power. Similarly, Democrats in the minority for each congressional district or Senate state or in the nation as a whole, if they, even if their Republican representative is doing good enough, they'll just say he's not, so that they can bring their tribe into power. So it's not as simple as any kind of universal survey implementation. where people just are asked survey questions, and then we derive all of the scoring data from those surveys. If people don't really turn out for elections, they're not going to turn out to answer these surveys, and so it's got to be done some other way. And I'll think about that more later. Just kind of wanted to present the idea of provisional power in the first 100 days after an election. And if representatives are not meeting thresholds on certain scoring metrics, they're booted out of office. They're under the threat of being booted out, and whoever's the runner-up is going to come into power. And under that threat, they're really going to be encouraged to do a better, I think. Applying that kind of, I get that there's electoral pressure anyway, right? They're elected representatives democratically, and they're under the threat of being booted out anyway in the next 4 years or the next. Still don't think it's enough. I think that this would really, now, an honest objector, I'll even object to myself. Okay, so they're good for the first 100 days. All right, fine. What's that do? And then in the rest of the congressional term or the Senate term or whatever, well, they're just going to be bad apples. Okay, fine. That's, we could extend it up to 200 days. I don't care. I mean, for elected representatives, and again, we need to think more. We need to think both ethically and logistically about how we design these scoring systems, right? But in any case, I think it's an interesting idea. I've never heard it before. I just wanted to propose it. Yeah, that's pretty much, those are pretty much the main points I wanted to make in this one. All right, great. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe.